often from scratch, and additional rolling stock brought in to augment the dilapidated French railway system. As the runways were laid, hangars erected and control systems established, more and more aircraft were flown in. But the carefully planned Allied schedule was rapidly being overtaken by events. Although the Allies had pushed small forces into Tunisia within a few days of the landings, they had failed to capture the key strategic ports of Tunis and Bizerta. These were now firmly in German hands, and the French garrison forces disarmed or driven into the mountains. The German build-up in Tunisia threatened to dislocate the Allied strategy of cutting Rommel's lines of supply. Indeed, the ports of Tunisia were much closer to Italy than those of Libya, the sea lanes more secure, and the bridgehead easier to maintain. In December, Allied spearheads that had come to within 10 miles of Tunis were thrown back, consolidating the bridgehead and securing all the major Tunisian ports and harbours under Axis control. December also brought rain, which fell most heavily in the northwest, flooding roads and turning the battlefield into a sea of mud. By Christmas, further advances had become impossible, and a wretched stalemate settled over the front. In December, Rommel abandoned the Mersa Brega positions and began a phased withdrawal to Burat. In mid-January, he fell back again, this time to the Tunisian frontier, evacuating Tripoli en route. 8th Army reached Tripoli on January the 23rd, an advance from El Alamein of some 1,400 miles. Although Rommel and the remnants of his force had escaped capture or destruction, Montgomery could take comfort in the fact that he had given the Panzer Army a sound thrashing, destroying more than half of it, and driving the rump in full retreat through Egypt and Libya. In Tunisia, rain and mud continued to hamper operations throughout much of January. This was particularly true in the north, where neither side was able to make any headway. In the south, however, the Germans launched limited attacks to seize key passes in the eastern dorsal. These gave access onto the coastal plain and were only lightly defended, mainly by French North African forces. Lacking effective anti-tank guns, the French were easily overwhelmed, and American efforts to come to their aid were thrown back. The Germans at this time were also active in the air, where they enjoyed several advantages, including all-weather runways and overall air superiority. German efforts were focused on disrupting the Allied build-up, harassing their lines of communication, and damaging or destroying their forward airfields. Air superiority allowed the Germans to employ their Stukas to maximum effect, and swarms of these aircraft raided with impunity in the first months of the campaign. Throughout the battle for Tunisia, Allied efforts on the ground would be continually menaced by these attacks, and huge numbers of their own fighters would be lost in the desperate battle to achieve parity, and eventually dominance in the air. At the end of January, the last key strategic pass in the eastern dorsal fell to 21st Panzer, Rommel's veteran desert formation, which had been hastily re-equipped on its arrival in Tunisia. With the capture of the Faid Pass, the Germans had achieved all of their initial objectives, the consolidation of a powerful bridgehead and the concentration of their forces. They were now in a position to seize the initiative and launch a major offensive of their own. The focus of this effort would be the American Second Corps, holding the most southerly sector of the line. Second Corps was deployed in 3 armoured battle groups, holding a discontinuous front. On February the 14th, 21st Panzer advanced out of the south, driving northwest towards Sidi Bouzid. 10th Panzer, meanwhile, which had taken over 21st Panzer's positions in the eastern dorsal, attacked out of the Faid Pass, driving due west. Caught between these pincers, the Americans fell back in confusion, and on the following day began a general withdrawal to the line of the western dorsal, some 50 miles to the rear. On the 15th, the attack was joined by a German battle group consisting of the Afrika Korps' remaining mobile formations. But by the 18th, the American withdrawal was complete, and the danger appeared to be averted. On the 19th, however, after pausing to reorganize and resupply, the Germans resumed their offensive. 21st Panzer advanced towards Biber, while the Afrika Korps Battle Group and 10th Panzer assaulted the pass through the western dorsal at Kasserine. The pass fell early on the 20th, and by the afternoon, German armour and mechanized infantry were pouring through the western dorsal onto the comparatively flat plains beyond. Ahead of them lay 2 key towns, Tala, a vital link in the Allied system of north-south communications, and Tebessa, a major Allied supply dump in eastern Algeria. The speed of the advance was reminiscent of Rommel's early blitzkriegs in Libya and Egypt, and sent a panic through the Allied High Command. If the Afrika Korps and 10th Panzer reached the Algerian frontier and broke through into the rear of the battle zone, they could wreak unimaginable havoc, perhaps even precipitate an Allied collapse. Blocking forces were scraped together from wherever they could be found. Artillery and tanks were rushed to the area, and Allied ground attack aircraft operated around the clock. Savage fighting, confusion and fear characterized these engagements. The Allied blocking forces were ad hoc commands consisting of elements from different units and divisions. Britons, Americans and French fought side by side, commanded by whichever officer happened to be nearest. For their part, the Germans were equally determined to break through and kept up the pressure relentlessly. But they had now advanced for 100 miles, and their supplies of fuel and ammunition were running low. The Allied blocking forces, on the other hand, were fighting only a few miles from their main bases and lines of communication, and were being rapidly resupplied and reinforced. Gradually, the tide of battle began to turn. The Allied lines held, and on the 22nd, the Germans disengaged. Having lost the initiative, Rommel could do little but order a complete withdrawal. The brave gamble had failed, although only just, and the panzer groups would soon be needed to buttress the southern defences against Montgomery's 8th Army. forward elements of 8th Army had reached the Tunisian frontier in early February, capturing Medellin on the 16th.